Before we're dismissed for class, we'll sing number 452.
There's within my heart a melody, Jesus whispers sweet and low. Fear not, I am with thee, peace be still, in all of life's ebb and flow. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go, feasting on the riches of his grace, resting neath his sheltering wing, always looking on his smiling face. That is why I shout and sing. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go. Soon he's coming back to welcome me, far beyond the starry sky. I shall wing my flight to worlds unknown. I shall live with him on high. Jesus, 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 sweetest name I know, fills my every longing, keeps me singing as I go. Will now be dismissed to class.
up and speak up. So that's actually a positive. Okay, they've learned that lesson. But we're going to see some other things about unity, and with that zeal, tempering that and balancing that with a recognition of the danger of misunderstanding and really being able to recognize what's actually going on. So let's read. We're going to read chapter 22. I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and read verses 1 through 9, chapter 22 of Joshua, and we'll read verses 1 through 9. Richard, if you could do that for us, that would be great. Very good. Okay, let's go over a few things. I know we've talked about some of this, but I think it's important to see. So we have the idea of them receiving God's promise and God's promises being fulfilled. Let's go back and think about some of our discussion from Numbers, though. You remember when they had all the complaining and the murmuring and all of that. What did Israel, that was the disbelieving generation, we might say, what did Israel want to do? Or what were a lot of them saying they wanted to do? Let's go back to Egypt. Let's go back to, oddly enough, let's go back to that good diet in slavery, okay? So that was the idea, and of course that's dealt with. If you could have stopped and said, this is what it's going to be like when you fulfill the promise, when God's promise is fulfilled, which is what God does from time to time, I think they would have just been shocked unless they were really believing the Lord, okay? So sometimes I think there's a lesson, we get caught up in a particular moment of despair or discouragement or whatever is going on. If we could just see out beyond that what God has in store for his people. And now we're getting to see it. They are getting to see it. Now let's just talk briefly about these 2.5 tribes, because it's going to be talked about a lot in these chapters. What was the situation with that? Does anybody remember why the 2.5 tribes are located where they are versus with the rest of Israel? Go ahead.
On that side of the river, they saw that this thing was good, and they asked Moses, can we stay here?
Yes.
But then Moses at first thought, well, they're just checking me out.
Yeah.
But then they assured him that, no, we're going to go fight with them.
Yeah. We want to come back. So their wives and children are here. And did they do what they said? Yeah, they were completely faithful in that way. They went, and they're going to come back. And I'll give you a map here in just a minute, just what you wanted on Sunday morning, so you can kind of see what we're talking about. We've talked about it some, but this is the context. I want to notice something else, and we've seen this with Caleb. We've seen it with God's command to Israel, but I just think it's so important to emphasize in our minds. Notice So in chapter 22 and verse 1, which was read, then Joshua summoned the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh. So that's the 2.5 tribes we're talking about. And said to them, you have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. Now, does he mean they were flawless people? No. So sometimes what we deal with is people have the idea if there's emphasis on obedience, kind of the comeback on that or response to that is you're emphasizing obedience too much because somehow you believe that we have to be sinless. No. It does mean we're to completely obey God or fully obey God to the best of our ability and from our heart. And when we fall short, we seek his mercy and grace. Okay, so that's simple. So he says, you have kept all that Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you and have listened to my voice in all that I commanded you. So they had listened to Moses. They were listening to Joshua. Okay, all of that's good. You have not forsaken your brothers. So again, you have loyalty to God and loyalty to each other, okay? So he says, you haven't forsaken your brothers these many days, but have kept the charge of the commandment of the Lord your God, which says we have responsibilities. God is gracious to us and merciful to us, but we have responsibilities. Now look at verse 4. And now the Lord your God, now you met that condition and those conditions of faith, the Lord your God has given rest to your brothers as he spoke to them. What does he mean, rest? What's rest? Right. Yeah, they'll have peace. The blessing has been fulfilled in that way. He goes on to say, therefore, turn now and go to your tents to the land of your possession, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan. But then he says in verse 5, is there still responsibility? So even when you received the blessing, was there still responsibility there for them? Yes. What happened if they later rebelled against God regarding this possession? Yeah, they're not going to get to keep it. Okay. So some people today will say, well, what about that land? Well, Israel forfeited that blessing when they rebelled against God. Okay. So verse 5, only be very careful to observe the commandment and the law which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you. Now notice this. We get all this obedience and obey the command of God and all of that. He says to love the Lord your God and to walk in all his ways and keep his commandments and hold fast. Now this is interesting. Hold fast to him. There's no separation between here are the commandments of God and here's a relationship with God. So, often when people present it, well, if you emphasize doing what God says, maybe you're getting away from having a relationship with God. Well, that could be if somebody has that mindset. But really, you're not obeying God the way you need to if your motive is not right, if your heart isn't doing this out of love. But if you have a heart that loves God, you're going to hold fast to him. Well, what does it mean to hold fast to him? Well, I seek to obey him. And that's what you have there in that passage. So he sends them away. They're going to go back home. Verse 7, now to the 1/2 tribe of Manasseh, Moses had given a possession in Bashan, and to the other half, Joshua had given this to them. He says, look at verse 8, return to your tents with great riches and with very much livestock, with silver, gold, bronze, iron, and with very many clothes. Divide the spoil of your enemies with your brothers. And so we have this wonderful text there in verse 9, this land of possession which they had possessed. Now notice what he says, according to the command of the Lord through Moses. Okay. So what you see is you have the command of God, you have submission to God, but then you have the blessing. Okay. So, and that really you get everything in this. You get loving the Lord your God, holding on to God, obeying God, and the blessing. Okay. God's going to completely be faithful to his people as they submit to him. So that all looks really good, and we get to this next section, and this gets very interesting. So that's the background. Let's move on. So in verses 10 through 12, let's read that. Verses 10 through 12. Bo, can you read that for me, please?
And when they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a great impressive altar. Now the children of Israel heard someone say, Behold, the children of Reuben, the children of Gad, half the tribe of Manasseh, have built an altar on the frontier of the land of Canaan, in the region of the Jordan, on the children of Israel's side. And when the children of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered together at Shiloh to go to war against them.
Okay, let's talk about it. Now let's talk about perspective. Okay. From their perspective, we think about the history of Israel various times. Go all the way back to Numbers and think through what's happened. Things are looking really good right now for Israel. And from their perspective, this news comes back. So these 2.5 tribes have received their promise. Everything looks very settled and peaceful. From that standpoint, they're going to receive rest from God. So it says, when they came to the region of the Jordan, which is in the land of Canaan, the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh built an altar there by the Jordan, a large altar in appearance. And there's some keys here. So verse 11, and the sons of Israel, it says, heard it said, okay? Heard it said, Behold, the sons of Reuben and the sons of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh have built an altar at the frontier of the land of Canaan in the region of Jordan on the side belonging to the sons of Israel. And when the sons of Israel heard of it, the whole congregation of the sons of Israel gathered themselves at Shiloh to go up against them in war. So they're ready to kill them. Now, let's back up for a minute and let's look at the facts versus interpretation. Okay. Let me ask this. Can you understand, with the past being like it has been, why they might come to the wrong conclusion here? Sure. So they're ready to go to war, but their interpretation and there's assumption kind of laid into that interpretation. When they hear about an altar being built at the frontier of the land, what are they thinking? Here we go again. I mean, that's got to be what you're thinking. Like, here we go again. We get the promise has been fulfilled, and now they're about to worship idols. Okay, that's what historically they had come out of from Egypt, and over you can go back and look at the different folks that had influenced Israel and what happened and all of this. Now, let me ask you this, though. Have there been these kinds of things built when there was not idolatry in their history? Anything like this? What? Had they ever had some structure that at least served as a memorial? Yeah, they had. So we can understand it, and that's one of those where you back up and you go, okay, I can see why they thought this, but I can also see where there's another explanation, right? But if they're right about the idolatry and they don't do anything about it, then they're going to be held accountable too. So you can really see where they really need more information about this scenario. But their understanding in their mind is, there's idolatrous practices going on. This is blasphemous. This is an attack on God. This is undermining God's blessing. And because of our zeal for God, we're going to take care of this. Okay? Does anybody have a comment at this point before we move further? I got Alan, go ahead. Yes. That's a good point. So Alan mentioned, and I don't think it had been that long that they had been fighting together for the same cause, and now this would be a very not that it couldn't happen, but it was really a quick turnaround here, and so the other thing is the 2.5 tribes might have prevented. This is what Alan's saying. Some of this miscommunication. It'd been nice if they had sent communication to them to say, hey, we just, you are building a big altar, okay? So they could have sent communication to them so they wouldn't have been so concerned and all of that. So there is that side. Rob, did you have your?
Thing, just a good lesson for us of, lack of communication. We do things knowing what our intentions are.
Right.
And we perceive that everybody else is going to know what
Yeah.
we're doing exactly for our reasons. Sometimes that's not the case. And we see that in the Lord's church as well.
Yes.
Sometimes just don't communicate.
I think that's really valuable, and we're going to even get deeper into that here in a minute. But this is going to have a good resolution. But you can see that these kinds of communication problems leading to war, conflict, have been going on with God's people for a long time. Sometimes we think that's just us, but we probably have all known situations. I can think of a lot of situations where I think, man, I should have communicated that better, more proactively in a preventive way, and then there wouldn't have been a misunderstanding. And we probably can all think about those things, and we strive to do that. But even at that point, what we're going to see is the importance of, even if we could have done better, let's make sure and communicate before we go to conflict. Now, there's a time for conflict. If they'd really been worshiping idols, if they'd really been teaching, blasphemous doctrine against God's truth, that's different. But you have to see what's going on in its fullness. What were you going to say, Daryl?
Deuteronomy 12:5 speaks of a singular place that they should build according to the Lord's instruction to offer the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also in violation of that Deuteronomy.
So they would, and we'll get into that. Of course, they're going to say it's just like I think they call it the witness, but a memorial. We'll come back to that, but I see what you're saying. Yeah. If you're going to sacrifice, yeah. We'll come back to that. That's right. But I can see where Israel would have, the other tribes would have said, wait a minute, what's going on? Roger, were you going to say?
Don't jump to conclusions. Get facts before you start acting.
Yeah. It's very understandable. But they, even though maybe there could have been more, I will say what we're going to see is they are going to try to gather facts. Now, they're prepared to go to war, but they are at least going to gather facts about this, and there's a great lesson in that. Anybody else before? Because we're going to talk about that some more. Okay. So they are equipped to go to war against them. Let's read verses 13 through, tell you what, we need to do some reading. 13 through 22. 13 through 22. Jaden, you feel like reading?
When the sons of Israel sent to the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, to the half tribe of Manasseh, to the land of Gilead, Phinehas, son of Eleazar, with him 10 sheep, 1 sheep for each father's household, for each of the tribes of Israel. Each one of them was the head of his father's household among the thousands of Israel. They came to the sons of Reuben, the sons of Gad, to the half tribe of Manasseh, the land
Okay, so there's quite a bit there. Let's try to kind of get this in mind. Now, there's several important things that are laid out by the tribes that are concerned that I want you to think about. So you have these, Western tribes, and they're assuming, and you understand why, apostasy. You have, and this kind of goes to what Darrell was saying too, but some rival altar from even the location, the place, and the manner in which it was to be done. They see, and I've got Deuteronomy 12, by the way, up here, Darrell, rebellion against the law of Moses. They're seeing all of that. That's all their perception, interpretation of what's going on. Something else, news spreads pretty quickly, even if they didn't have texting back then, okay? So it had gotten there, and you can see why they would be concerned. And we looked at verses 10 through 12, and the eastern tribes are building a great altar to see. Okay. So the immediate reaction, so this whole congregation gathers to go to war. These people are zealous. They want to be faithful to God. They're concerned that their brethren are not being faithful to God. But they are acting on somewhat of an assumption here as they interpret these things in a particular way. They'll get more understanding. So the Jordan River forms a boundary between them. They're concerned also about future generations. If you look at verse 25, notice verse 25. For the Lord has made the Jordan a border between us and you sons of Reuben and sons of Gad. You have no portion in the Lord. So your sons may make our sons stop fearing the Lord. We'll come back to that. But they're concerned about several things. They're concerned about not only now, but they've learned a lot, by the way. How would that impact future generations? What's going to happen after that? Something else, they mentioned two historical events. If you go back earlier, what were the two events from their past that they said, don't you remember this? Okay, Achan, and he says, look, it's not like Achan perished by himself. There were real, like we said, corporate consequences, group consequences for this, for Israel, even for Achan's own family. What was the other one? Peter, what was it about that? Yep. Yeah, Phinehas comes in, and the Midianites came to Israel. You remember the man and the woman, and they take a spear and he kills them, and there's this plague on all of Israel. And so we remember all of that. So all of these are cases really of idolatry and unfaithfulness to the covenant, disobedience, consequences, not only for the people involved, but consequences for everybody else, it feels like, and for the nation of Israel, and this terrible blight on their history and their story, okay? So they're thinking, what are they thinking? If you bring up Peor and you bring up a situation with the Midianite woman and you bring up Achan, apostasy, right? Departure from God, and they're thinking this is all about to get replayed again. Should they have been cautious about that? Sure. But still, as they're cautious about that, they also need more information. And so, yes, they're zealous. Yes, they're thinking in the right way. And I know that's black and white and kind of hard to see. But you can see, as you think about that map, here's Reuben and here's Gad. You have this border, but this is going to be a problem. If this is really, like if this is idolatry going on, then there's going to be major civil war. So as much rest and unity as they thought they had, can you imagine emotionally what they're going through? These tribes, these Western tribes, thinking about, as good as this seems, we're about to have civil war. We've been fighting the enemies of God, and now the enemy's us. That's what they are thinking. Has the enemy ever been us? Yes. We've given several historical examples of that, but there needs to be more information regarding this. So, they did do good, okay? They did use wisdom. So let's look at it here in this context. There could have been immediate bloodshed. I mean, they could have just gone in there just with this assumption and taken vengeance on these people. And if they had, that would have been terrible, wouldn't it? So instead of that, Israel sends. Now, there's some real wisdom in this. Israel sends a delegation. And who is representative of Israel? Who's representing Israel? Who do they send? Anybody? Tribal leaders. So you have religious leadership. You have Phinehas the priest. So that's actually a symbol of those who should have been spiritually leading, should have wisdom. It's interesting that he was the one that goes in. So he's a symbol of covenant faithfulness. That takes us back to Numbers 25, as Rachel was mentioning. And then you have 10 tribal leaders. So what's the wisdom in sending these tribal? There's a couple of things here that are important regarding who they sent. Why are the tribal leaders important? That they would be the ones that would go and find out and gather information. Exactly. So there's several things there, but what Kelton says is the primary point. You would think these are representative of the tribes of God's people. So they should have been more mature men. They should have been those who were concerned about Israel as a whole, even these 2.5 tribes. They were concerned about not only their tribe, but the people of God in general. So if you have people going in to gather very critical information, you want it to be people that are trustworthy. You don't want it to be somebody who's really quick on the trigger in this situation, but you want it to be somebody, if they need to pull the trigger, they will, if I can use that metaphor. So that's a balance. You have some people who might be cowardly. Well, that wouldn't be these men. But on the other hand, you could have somebody who's rash, and that wouldn't be these men, hopefully. So they're wise. It makes sense. And something else is you see a recognition within Israel through God's guidance of making sure you strive to have quality leadership. They had Moses, they had Joshua, but you're talking about priests, you're talking about men that have shown maturity, hopefully. And I think this is demonstrated in this story. So rather than, I got both you guys, just hang on. Rather than just everybody rushing in and getting a mob mindset, which could have happened, let's send in trustworthy, responsible leaders who aren't rash, but aren't cowardly, and let's process the information and then make a responsible decision that God would be pleased with. There's so much wisdom in that, and that's not always difficult because this is a very emotional thing. This could be a threat to all of God's people and their promises. So very important. Okay, I'm gonna go to Tony and then Jesse. I'll come back to you. Go ahead, Tony.
And although they did make good decisions, one thing that we don't see that we're not told all before they done anything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. That is a good point. Jesse?
Well, that's what I was going to add to is, remember they looked at Achan and what Achan did. Well, there's a lot of people's fault. That was even Israel's fault there. So by history looking back, they would have saw that they had faults because they didn't ask the right questions. And that's where Tony goes in as they would have had, they probably would have thought with God will build this time because they had enough. These elders of these tribes had enough sense to look back and look at God's words and let's make sure that we're doing this the right way.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us because they brought that up. Achan brought that up. I mean, they brought that up. So they had to think about where do we mess up at? Let's don't mess this up.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Go ahead, Rachel.
Looking at this story, you can see God's wisdom in the church.
Oh, that's good.
You've got
Yeah.
leadership, and you also see the wisdom in
That's good.
And how the spread. Are we disciplined?
Yes. Did everybody hear Rachel? I didn't think you did. You said a lot. I'm going to try to remember all that. You have to help me. Rachel just mentioned the wisdom in this process also shows the wisdom in how God has organized the local congregation. I think that's what you were saying. And so you have leadership, by the way, who should have been appointed by the congregation, right? And if it's the kind of leadership it needs to be, you have accountability. This is where church discipline can come into place. You have balance. You didn't mention this, but it goes along with what you're saying. You don't want to be a fearful person, but you don't want to be a rash person. That's interesting because those are the very qualifications of elders, right? And so, did I get everything you were saying? That is interesting. We saw this in Numbers. You remember when we looked at the camp in Numbers and saw how it foreshadowed some principles that we see in the New Testament? So they had city elders, or they had tribal leaders. It's interesting to see that kind of, there's wisdom in delegation. There's wisdom in recognition of maturity and discernment. It doesn't mean these tribal leaders were flawless, and it doesn't mean elders today are going to be flawless, but they can be faithful. And they were to be faithful and make wise decisions and identify when we have an error that really threatens us versus a misunderstanding. I had somebody else. Go ahead.
Touched on it, but it makes you think of Matthew 18
Mm-hmm.
and the wisdom of Jesus and explaining how to deal with issues.
Like if personal offenses,
Like
yeah,
issues,
yeah, yeah,
you and your brother first, then you take
yeah, to gain the proper information.
your witnesses, and then
Yeah.
the church. But you still see the wisdom in research.
Yeah, and communication.
Not jumping to
Communication. Now, I will say to balance all that out, I think, and this goes to what we were saying, there are those who can be rash, and this is the lesson we need to learn here in gathering proper information. It can be interesting. Sometimes you can document, and it's pretty easy to do that nowadays, actually, but if you document, let's say there's an error that's being taught, okay? Is the first question you ask, is this a misunderstanding, or is this really an error? But if we get to the point where it's documented, it is error, it's not just a misunderstanding, and maybe there's a pattern of behavior, then you deal with that in a forthright, firm, loving way. There are those who want to say something that is actually erroneous biblically is always just a misunderstanding in order to continue to advocate it, and so you have to deal with that in the right way. But on the other hand, you don't want to turn everything into it's time to go to, some major controversy if that's not necessary. So you have to keep that balance. All right, let me go back. Where are we? Okay. So although Israel was wrong in their maybe initial conclusions, their procedure insulated them from making a terrible decision. So let's look at this. So the eastern tribes, they respectfully explain the real purpose of their actions. And notice they say, and this is important, this goes back to some things Darrell and others said in Deuteronomy 12. They explain the altar wasn't for burnt offerings and sacrifices or a replacement altar. That's vital. We're not trying to replace this other altar. We're not doing things with this that you might have thought. The altar, though, was to serve as a witness, as a memorial, as a testimony that they serve the same Lord, share the same covenant, and belong to the same people. Why might they have thought for their own children and grandchildren and future generations that would be important? There's a major reason. Alan? Exactly. So Alan said there's an inherent danger. You got a boundary separation. They're not really over there with the rest, right? So that could present some problems, making sure that even though we have this disparity in location, that we understand we're serving the same God. We're really part of the same spiritual family. And so now what you find out is they actually have noble reasons for this, not what it might have looked like. And notice verse 27. It shall be a witness between us and you that we perform the service of the Lord. So rather than serving false gods, they actually were serving the Lord, and they're guarding future faithfulness, not practicing rebellion. Now, here's something really good about the leaders that came to them that I want you to notice. What did they do? They listened. They listened. They heard. You know, I might have a perspective of something, but then I come and talk to you, and now I have a whole different perspective of a thing. But I have to be willing to listen. You might come talk to me, and I might mention something to you, and you just hadn't thought about it. And it's not really that you intended not to think about it, or I intended not to think about it. We just need to communicate about this. And so in that way, God's glory is going to be preserved. The altar is named witness. So major lessons for us before we close. Zeal is good, but it needs to be governed by knowledge and discernment. Secondly, God's people must communicate before condemning. There is a time to condemn a thing, though. It's not always just a misunderstanding, but we want to make sure it's not a misunderstanding. God's revelation and authority really matters. If you look at verse 22, you notice there's proclamation of who God is, and the altar demonstrated that faith must be passed down. Assumptions can create conflict faster than facts. Good intentions and purposes still need clarity. That goes to what I think some of you mentioned, including Alan. Unity requires shared understanding, not just shared history. And the best outcomes end in peace, not victory necessarily. And we need to be ready to be corrected. If that brings restoration and peace, that's wonderful. Okay? So, read Joshua chapters 23